The land and the depth of the land is a little bit different for my head, but and that's
you had a very different experience growing up. Like I've lived in city my whole life, so like this is where I have to connect. Like this is what I have. And I mean, my depth of connection and relationship to land is through like a suburban backyard.
Yeah.
So, you know, like,
well, and it shouldn't be invalidated on any level. And I didn't mean to put invalidation on it in any level. And if anybody felt invalidated in that, that's listening, I want to tell you, there's nothing invalid about that. You create your biome. Your biome is what is around you right now, period. You don't even have to create it. Your biome is here. It's what's around you right now. You have to work with and interact with it to be a part of that healthy biome. And you need to create health within that biome. Connecting to the old growth or the forest or the things like that is a completely different thing. And it is definitely a difference for me. For me, it's one of those things like, I'm like, I don't like this no more. Get me out of the city and back to my woods. You know, like for me, it's something that is a very present, very frequent thing. And so it is going to absolutely be a different experience for somebody who, you know, and there's, I don't like the way we do cities right now, but cities themselves can be an extremely beautiful thing. We see that a lot of documented knowledge of the northeastern nations were dense, huge cities, right? Thousands of people in these cities, and they're living in the forest in ways that are so interconnected with the biome, right? That, you know, they disappear when the time comes, right? When they're no longer there, it just goes back into the biome. So I don't like the way we do cities right now, but cities themselves can be a very powerful biome interconnectiveness. And we are at a space in population where we're not going to get away from that. We can do it healthier, we can do it better, we can make sure it's done in a better way, but we are still going to have spaces of population contention because we have 8 billion fucking people on this planet.
It's true. We do cities like monoculture.
Yes, like we do. We sterilize everything. We sterilize everything. And if we can stop there are people who are actually, and I want to say it's the Japanese, but I could be incorrect. And if I'm incorrect, I apologize. But I believe the Japanese have actually created apartment complexes that are like living apartment complexes, like their entire sides are all like living, like you know, their gardens and stuff like that. And there's been an AI created of they can basically work it to where they can create a tree. And I'm not sure, I don't think they've actually put this into actualization, but they're working on the way to put it into actualization, where a tree is growing around your apartments. Like you have different apartments within this tree as it's growing, you know. I like hobbit houses. I think you could have cities of rolling hobbit houses and everybody has space of earth. And then you create these hobbit houses in this forest biome, you know, and so it's all there. And I think that you could take the apartment buildings you have right now, get rid of all of this grass, plant a tended garden of nutrient providing things, like have berries and have, you know, cattails and have root vegetables and everything else. And you could create it and have it be a part of, you know, everybody who is in that apartment either has to contribute 10 hours of work a month, or they have to contribute this amount of money a month, you know, like if you have people who can't contribute, or if you're not, like you're handicapped and you can't go out and you can't bend down. I can't garden like that. I can go out and, you know, make sure that instead of weeding, I'm out there snapping peas and leaving them for people that can come and get them later. You know, there's different ways that you can provide on the different levels. But we are going to be in cities. We have to think that, and we definitely have to, the biome is everywhere. We definitely have to see that the biome is everywhere.
It just in talking about this, I reflected on my suburban backyard, and there's a huge difference where you grew up, because that grew on its own and is ancient. I literally planted the trees in my backyard. Like they are very much like my family that I brought into the space. So there's like deep love for and knowing of each other since they were brought here. And it's a very, very different thing than being in an ancient forest that has watched and knows so much more. Do you miss them? Like, I'm sorry to bring it up that way,
we were
but
travelers as much as anything else.
Oh, so okay.
Because from my earliest memories to 5, I lived with my mother's, because it was my mom and several of her other women friends and their kids, basically a commune in the islands in the Pacific Northwest, up in the San Juans. And then my dad came when I was like 3 or 4, and I think like 3, maybe it was, so 3, we went to Alaska when I was like 3 years old. We went up to Alaska, and I lived in a campground in Alaska for a few months, and then we came back down here, and Mom had my sister, and we were living in an old abandoned train station on Fur Island. And then we moved to we lived in a chicken coop in La Conner, or Conway, not La Conner. And then we moved to, and all of these spaces weren't like, at the most they're towns. Like Anacortes would probably be the largest space that I had lived in prior, and I didn't have a whole lot of memories of Anacortes. I have like 1 or 2 memories of living in Anacortes. And we lived on Guimas Island. We were constantly moving. And then at 5, we moved to Eastern Washington into the mountains outside of Goldendale. And we lived there in one piece of property from about 5 to about 7. A part of this time, I was up in a Muslim camp a few miles down the road for like, I would be there all week, and then I'd come home on the weekends. And then we moved when I was 7 to another piece of property. The piece of property where the lodge was, I have some pretty vivid memories of different, there was a tree outside. Like we moved the lodge around a few times, of course, and there was a tree outside that looked like an old woman holding like a baby, like it had been struck by lightning, and it was this big black tree. And it was and then there was my dad and Mom nailed a cow skull to a tree, and that was a skull of wisdom. My dad drew on it, and it was a skull of wisdom, and we had to stare at that when we were in trouble. And my dad taught me to hunt, and my mom taught, I learned how to live off the land. And so when my dad would teach me to hunt and track, he would take me out, and we had a place called Bear Mountain because we had found bear prints there. And it was this tiny little mound out in the middle of a field, and we would sit up there and like, it was covered in like little bushes. And so we'd look out. I miss the smell of plants. There are certain plants. When I was in the Muslim camp, we'd go up to pray every day. And as we would walk up to pray, you know, a few times a day, we would pick up something along the way, something of the earth along the way, because we would put that on our mat, and then we would pray with that. And there was a plant up there, and I think I can only hardly remember the smell. I want to say like I don't think it's eucalyptus. It was something else, but it was kind of shaped like eucalyptus. And I remember that, and I miss that smell. Yarrow, I miss plants. Like yarrow was always an important plant when I was growing up, and mullein was always an important plant I was growing up. And so I miss mullein, and I miss yarrow. And I still do, like I go outside, and as I'm walking around, like I'll reach out and I'll touch a plant and I'll talk to it as I'm walking past it, you know. I think I miss spaces of land, or like I think I miss the biome itself more than the specific things within it. Like, so when we get to Mosier, we had this pond, and we would break the ice in March and go swimming and try and make our horses go in the pond and swim with us in the pond. And we would skate on it in the winter, and we would ride our bicycles into it. Like they had to pull bikes out of the bike, and then you can't ride the horses in the pond because you rode the bike in the pond and you're going to break the horses, you know, like
yeah.
I remember that. I remember there was this plant that was like, I always thought of it as heather, but it's not heather. And it's like this big leafy green plant with these purple flowers on the end, and it would cover everything like vine-like almost. And we would have this little cabin that was like probably somebody's like 1-room little cabin that they lived in during the mining days. It was probably from the 1800s, 1700s. It was old and broken down on the property, and it was covered in vines, and we would go in there and hang out. And I remember, you know, like, I remember plants, I think, more than I remember trees. I was raised like, so one of the things that my mom taught me from very young was herbology. Now I can't do herbology. I can't retain it very well. And so like I heal, but I heal in different methods. Usually I do know some herbs, but not a whole lot. But so for me, I've always had that connection with the plant themselves. I was potty trained in the daffodil fields. I, you know, like, I remember going out and grabbing, we would get lupins every Mother's Day for my mom and bringing big bouquets of lupins for her. So it's the plants, I think, that's the most impactful for me.
It's interesting. You're like plants, we've just like in the West, we just are there, we completely ignore them. They're like they're a pest. They need to be avoided or like tamped down or poisoned or whatever, and they are the most prolific being on this planet. Do you know what I mean? And so like strong, that's not the word that I was trying to find, but just so resilient. My God, resilient and wise. Like they really are just
well, and I think
filled with
like plants heal us. Like plants, we need plants on a level that we need meat. We need plants on a level that's different, because plants themselves, different plants will provide different nutrients. Different plants will provide different healing properties. Different plants can make it to where you can withstand pain more. Different plants do different things. And we don't, if it's not an obvious thing, we tend to tamp it out, right? And plants are one of those things too. Like, so we were talking earlier about invasive versus indigenous, or becoming indigenous. Yellow dock is an invasive plant. It's not an indigenous plant. They call it white man's footprints. White men went, they left yellow dock, but yellow dock is an extremely healing plant. It has a whole lot of healing properties for it, right? And so when we look at it, we can see that, there are also like invasive species of plants that really drive out other species, right? That we have to be careful of. We can see there's such a vivid interaction for me. There's a honeysuckle bush outside my new apartment, and my younger of my daughters, honeysuckle is her flower. And so I put honeysuckle on me. We did matching tattoos. I did matching tattoos of both my daughters last year. I've got poppy for my older daughter.
Beautiful.
And then honeysuckle for my younger daughter. And when I moved here and there was a honeysuckle bush outside, every morning when I went outside and smelled the honeysuckle, it would make me think of my daughter, you know, and it was this lovely little interaction. Yeah. And I think that's another way to really, that's probably, I interact more with the biome that way, I think, around me than any other way around me. Right. And I do a lot of ancestral interaction, which is biome interaction is just different. Like, it's not like having to be like, it's just about talking to, you know. But,
so I have a question. I have two questions, actually. One, I saw a TikTok that you have where you said that you are part of a community that understands that energy, you don't accept cash for energy work. So like, what do you mean?
So I do tasseography, tea leaf reading. Sometimes you can't pay for tea leaf readings. And they're that comes from Ireland and the thought process, and Scotland and the thought process, but you're not supposed to accept gold for it. Now you can give gifts to people, right? Like, so I've done energy work my whole life. My mom raised me to be her energy worker. And I had a discussion with my mom prior to no longer talking to my mom. About 3 months prior, I had a discussion with my mom, and in the discussion, my mom would always ask me to do energy work for her, and I would do it whether I needed to or whether I felt like I could or not. And she was asking me to do energy work for money for her, and I told her, I said, I can't do that. I don't believe in that. And she goes, I said, I was taught not to do energy work for money. She goes, I never taught you that. I taught you not to take money for energy work. And I went, oh, that's why you think you don't even have to give me gifts. I get it now. Like, I believe that energy work done should be an exchange, right? Like if I am doing energy work for somebody, I mean, I don't like believing anybody should give me a gift for it, but like, you should not be coming and demanding energy work from me every day without bringing me something to make up for the energy you're taking, right? I believe things like card readings and things like that, you can accept gifts for them, but I don't believe that there's something that you should be taking money from. To me, it's almost like render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. I think in exchange of cash is not, it's almost dirty to me. Like it's not okay to me. And the reason is that's capital. It's not about reciprocity. And to me, energy work and everything revolving around that is about reciprocity, right? It's about that exchange. That doesn't mean that, you know, people should be, you know, well, first the video was because, TikTok does this thing where you follow somebody you think is somebody else, and it is a cloned account, and they follow you back. And now you have, I love you so much, and I was just thinking of your name, and now I want to do a reading for you. And I keep telling them, I'm sorry, but I don't accept readings from strangers. That day I had actually had somebody do that, and I said, okay, sure, I'd take that gift from you. And then they were like, well, here's my Cash App and my PayPal. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I couldn't pay for that. Like, that's not something that that is acceptable to pay for. Now I have absolutely gone in and got my palm read and given somebody $20 for reading my palm, right? Because I'm volunteering going into somebody, because that is the easiest way for them to, that is the gift at that point in time, right? It's the gift they need. It's the gift that's necessary. I have no problem using cash as the gift, right? Though definitely not when somebody's seeking me out 20 times a day to get
no, that's gross.
Right.
Yeah, I don't like that.
It was more in response to that than anything else. There is a huge contingent of energy workers who do believe that you should not be accepting Caesar's gold, right? Like you should not be accepting. There's some, especially when you're looking to decapitalize, right? When you're trying to remove that capitalization. Of course, we all have to live within it currently. And of course, I can't bring you a dozen eggs as much as I can bring you $20 half the time, right? And so it's not that I'm totally against taking money, but it is definitely that I'm against giving money to TikTok.
100%, especially when it's solicited. Oh, I want to do this for you, now pay me.
Right.
But I saw that video and I went, okay, because that's in line with kind of stuff I've been struggling with over the past year about it as well. And like I've come to the understanding for myself that you can't ever pay for energy work. There's no amount of money that is reciprocal in that, but I have bills to pay, and you can definitely pay for my groceries.
Yes.
You know, you can pay for my rent, you can pay for my phone bill. Like,
I agree with that 100. Well, and my mother, she kind of, and this is not, she kind of raised me to not actually, I kind of sometimes think of it as she raised me to be her blood doll, but her energy doll.
This sounds awful, by the way. All of this conversation around your mother is just awful, like abusive and awful.
It's very. And so I've been doing energy work for my mother since I was really young. The only compliment that my mother has ever given me in my entire life was literally to get me to give her energy when I was going through the most horrific trauma of my life. And I was like, I don't have it to give. And she's like, well, the reason that I ask you is because you have the best energy out there. I don't know anybody else whose energy is as light as yours and as healing as yours. And, you know, I think that's because you went through so many different branches of energy work and you've studied so many different things and you have such beautiful energy. And that's the reason I come to you. And it took me like 5 years to realize that the compliment was really a manipulation, but it is literally the only compliment I've ever gotten from my mother that wasn't backhanded in some way, though it's kind of backhanded. And that conversation that I was saying where she was like, you have to do this for me. And she would take, I mean, I'd be curled up in a ball, unable to breathe. And she'd be like, I need you to send me energy. And I'd be like, I can't, Mom, I just don't got it. And she's like, well, I need you to, and she would just, okay, Mom, I'll do it, you know. And in this conversation where she's demanding that I personally don't believe that you should do energy work for money, because in that reciprocity that we talk about, right? I believe that it all comes from somewhere. So if I'm bringing it to me, it's being taken from somebody else. And there are people that are starving in this world. I may be in a tight situation, but that doesn't mean that I'm starving. Right. Like, and then I would probably bring myself food. Like, I'd be like, please give me food, you know, like so I have a hard time asking for money, right, in my energy work. And I was like, I just can't do that. And she was so upset with me that the next 3 months, every conversation we had was, I could literally repeat her words back to her, and she would tell me how wrong I was. And then she did not go to my child's wedding, and she blamed it on me because I didn't give her money. And I was like, okay, that's like the last conversation we had, like, done. I can't do this anymore. And so for me, energy work has been like throughout. I think she would never be she would never reciprocate, right? There was no reciprocity. There was no like, you're my light worker and I demand energy from you once a month. So here, let me send you some of the product. The money I didn't send her was furs that she was charging me for. Like, she was charging me for sheep furs, and she had used the energy I had given her to take care of her animals and butcher her animals. And then she wanted to charge me for the butchering of the animals. And I was like, you owe that to me. I feel like I've done, if I was going to put a price on it, I've done $10,000 worth of work for you in the last couple of years, and you won't even give me anything. So I do believe that energy work needs reciprocity. Like, if I am doing energy work for you, you should absolutely be, you know, bring me something nice. If you're coming to my house to get energy work done, bring me food. You know, if you're coming over to get energy work done, bring me a gift. And it doesn't have to be every time, but it should not be every time without, you know. If it's online and I'm like, hey, would you do energy work for me? You know, if it's like I might not do it the first time, but like the second or third time, I'm definitely going to be sending you some cash or something. Or if you're doing energy work for me, you know, that you haven't offered, I'm definitely going to be giving something in return, right? Like, so I do believe that you should be reciprocal about energy work. For me, cash is, I don't work in cash as much as possible, just because I'm trying not to, right? So. But
thanks for that very thorough answer.
Yeah, it was definitely about the TikTokers more than anything. So.
Yeah. And you said earlier in our conversation that you don't think that we should be talking to other people's ancestors. And I would say absolutely, but now I have this situation where not my ancestor. Well, let me put a caveat on that, because we're all from an original
it depends on
ancestor.
how far back you go, right? So if you are you're fully German and your ancestors came here in 1600, and you don't have any intermix after that, like you say you're Amish, right? You've stayed in your tight-knit community since then. If you are talking to the nation of indigenous people, the ancients and the grandparents there, to ask them for something, right? Like, if your idea of going to your ancestors is to request things, then you're talking to somebody else's ancestors and not yours, and you're requesting something of them. That to me is really inappropriate, especially if you're talking about being a colonizer coming into a land and you're taking from the people that you've already colonized more, right? If you are you know, like say you came over in the potato famine, and your family came over then, and they were adopted by a nation, because this happens frequently, right? And so but you don't have any other, like, they were adopted by a nation, but their children were already white, right? And so it's not like they have that nation in their genes still. The people that adopted them are still your grandparents. they might not biologically be your grandparents, but they're your grandparents. So you would be free to talk to them without it feeling like, even if you have none of that genealogy in you, you know, they chose you, right? So that's not talking to not your ancestors. If you are, if you're, it's about like I could go and talk to, you know, an ancestor of another nation, about like, you know, how do I help, right? Or what should I be doing, right? So many people in interaction with ancestors, nothing I do is ever asking. I don't ask. For me, it's kind of icky to ask. Like for me, it just, and that's trauma. I know that that is trauma, but I don't ask. Like for me, I can't ask. And so I don't ask for help either. Like, you know, it's hard to ask for anything, right? And so, for so many people, they're talking to any spiritual form isn't a question of, can you give? I need, will you do? And to go to ancestors of a people that your ancestors may have done harm to and say, can you do, is ick to me, right? To go to ancestors that may have been harmed by your ancestors and say, shit, that was fucked. I'm sorry my ancestor did this. What can I do? Thank you for, you know, me still being here. And, you know, I apologize for the trauma that you went through that made me be here, you know, like, and things like that, reparations to those ancestors or conversations of accountability to those ancestors is an entirely different thought process. Yet too often, it really is directed to the too often I see people who are like, well, my ancestors might not be from the Pacific tribes, but I'm going to burn white sage, right? Like, you know, or it's my right to, I can put a chin line on, even though I'm not Inupiaq, you know, like just those different things.
It's so uncomfortable. Like, so uncomfortable.
Right. It is. You know, it is. And then you've got people out there who are so sweet and positive. I went and got my hair cut. First time in a long time. Went over, it was Valkyrie something salon, right? And I was like, oh, that's cool. Went over, sat, had the most amazing conversation with this cool ND person, neurodivergent person, dragons all over their office. They got witchy shit all over their talked about Nordic paganism. We connected on so many levels. And as I'm leaving, I noticed on their card, because I hadn't seen the sign on their wall, but on their card, they have a Valkyrie, but she has a chin line. And I'm like, and I knew that this person from the conversation we had would want me to say something. And I told her, I said, you know, just so that you know, because I'm aware that you don't, otherwise you wouldn't have, and that you do want to know, this is cultural appropriation, this chin line on this Valkyrie, because this is something we only see in the Inuit. Well, I didn't say this is called, I said, this is something we only see in the Inuit people and the Inupiaq people. It is something that is not global, and it's definitely not something that's picking up. And she was like, oh, she's like, well, shit, I'll be changing that. You know, her response was the correct and appropriate response. She's like, it'll take me a minute because somebody else does my graphics, my cards, and for my wallets, I have to go. And I'm like, shh. It's not about how long it'll take you. It's about the fact that you, and I didn't say this directly to her, but she knew, it's not about how long it'll take you. It's about the fact that you're like, oh, I didn't know, I have to fix that. You know, and
it's an honest reaction, right? Yeah. Like, it's just an honest reaction. We don't know what we don't know. And then when we're told, we can change.
Yes.
Like, it's
simple. 100%. And if that's the talking to somebody else's ancestors that you're doing, more power, right? But if you're talking to somebody else's ancestors because, you know, you feel that by talking to somebody else's ancestors, you can go to the powwow, right? You know, like, there's a whole different fucking scene within this, right?
Oh,
like, at that, if you're playing Hannah on TikTok, who's talking to somebody else's ancestors so she can dress up indigenous, right? You know, if that's why you're talking to somebody else's ancestors, you shouldn't be talking to somebody else's ancestors.
I'm bringing it up because I'm struggling with it, because my initial response was, I'm not allowed to do this.
Yeah.
Right. And, but it's part of this journey. I asked, and he was like, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I'm here to learn. I'm here to sit at his feet and be taught how to be an honorable ancestor on Turtle Island. Like, I'm being taught how to be honorable here.
Yeah. I would, so from what I understand from our conversation, you don't have an actual Indigenous ancestry to Turtle Island, right?
None.
But to Ireland, right?
Yeah,
and that's
Scotland and Ireland.
Yeah, Celtic. So Celtic indigeneity.
Yeah, Celtic indigeneity.
Probably Pictish, as well. So I would make sure that any lessons that you're talking about talking to Turtle Island ancestors of other people who you're trying to learn from, correct? Is that what you're stating? I just want to double check. Okay. So I would make sure, say you're talking to somebody who is coastal Salish, that their heritage is coastal, the ancestor is a coastal Salish person. First, I would make sure that you are talking to elders who are coastal Salish as well that are currently alive, just to make sure that you're not misinterpreting his words in any way, shape, or form, right? And that you're doing honor to his descendants, right? Because that's important and huge. But you're talking about, how do I do this in an appropriate way, and how do I make sure that I'm being, even though I'm not your descendant, I'm still being a good descendant on this land, right? And that's absolutely understandable. I would only caution that I would make sure that I was talking to alive people, just because sometimes it's hard to interpret ancestors, right? And also because by doing that, you're then also honoring his descendants, and making sure that because his needs and his thought processes of what should be done or should be interacted with are because of the trauma. I mean, say you're talking to somebody from the 1600s, right? Because of the trauma between 1600 and now, the needs might be different. The everything might be just a little bit different, and you need to make sure that you're honoring down. And only because, you're obviously trying to do everything in the best, healthiest, most, appropriate way to make sure that you're doing honor. That's obvious in what you're doing. You're trying to do something that's doing honor. And that, to me, is the way to ensure that you're making sure you're not making mistakes. Does that make sense? But it makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense because you're trying to, this is the land and the biome that you're trying to grow roots in. So you should be hearing the people of this land, right? You should be hearing the people whose biome this is, right?
Exactly.
So that you can grow roots within this biome,
Yeah, exactly.
To do the best, or not the best, but to be as, for me personally, what I would probably do is, if you know who this person is, maybe find his specific descendants and say, or have conversations with them as well,
I have been purposely avoiding that. Every time that comes up, I'm like, I'm very uncomfortable about that. And the reason is because this gift of talking with the dead is something I've done my whole life, but been private about it, never shared it, never talked about it until last April.
Yeah.
So it's connected to a lot of fear of punishment and fear of rejection. There's a lot of my own kind of shit, and connected with reaching out to I would say that fear of punishment and that fear of rejection is probably part of that indoctrination and colonization. It is a very European concept to punish people for trying, right? Yeah. Even punishment is kind of a European concept, right? Yeah. And it's a very European concept to reject as well. Like, most Indigenous nations in Turtle Island, and of course I don't want to state all, but most Indigenous nations in Turtle Island, and I would state that most Indigenous nations I know across the planet are welcoming to people. That is part of why Turtle Island was able to be colonized, because
the Europeans weren't rejected at the beach and,
Yeah.
killed off, right? Like, so, oh yeah, come home for dinner, like, it's part of that lack of rejection, and that lack of hate for other that is in the history and in the epigenetics and in the ancestors that is indigenous, right? And that fear of punishment and that fear of rejection is very much about the what the colonizer has set within us, that like like I was saying earlier, ain't no culture, color, or creed without internalized greed, right? Because colonization has given us all internalized greed. Not every human, but like every space now works on money, right? So it's given us all this internalized greed. And it's the same thing with this fear of punishment, this fear of retribution, this fear of rejection. It really comes from that othering and that need to maintain control, right? So I would state more with indigenous people than with non-indigenous people. If you have an ancestor who has come to you and is talking to you, and if it is a gift that you've been given to be able to talk to ancestors, right? If you have an ancestor who is coming to you and talking to you that has been voluntary in doing that, especially, then talking to their descendants. I mean, obviously I can't predict everything, right? But talking to their descendants is more likely to be met with a wow, like that's amazing. I'm so glad to hear that. And thank you for sharing that, right? Than it is to be met with a, what the fuck do you think you're doing? Right.
Which is what I'm afraid of.
Yeah. And there might be some, initial like thought process of, well, who are you? Right. Or why do you think you're talking to somebody?
I asked that to myself. Who the fuck do you think you are? Like, who the fuck do you think you are?
Listen, I think if I can teach enough people that we're loving and kind and communal and nurturing, I can change the entire fucking world. Who the fuck do I think I am? And yet,
no, I agree with that.
That's the only thing we can ever be, right? Is to attempt to do better. So,
well, there's through seventh Fire Messenger on TikTok, he shared another creator, and I can't remember off the hand who it was, who said that there's an indigenous prophecy that says that at some point in time, the white children will seek out indigenous elders and knowledge keepers to learn from. And if I had seen that earlier in my life, like I saw it when I was ready to see it, because I would have reached out much earlier. Like I'm reaching out now. I'm reaching out to learn, and I'm being connected to amazing knowledge keepers who are teaching me. But if I had known that was part of the prophecy, maybe I wouldn't have been so afraid earlier.
Yeah. Well, and I know for me, like that is the first memory I have, is the seventh fire prophecy. I literally remember being like 2 years old and sitting in what must have been like one of the rooms off the library in Anacortes or out in Fidalgo, and a room where there's a bunch of other kids near my age and some a little bit older and a bunch of young adults. And there are 3 elders sitting in the front of the room. And one is talking about the fact that the 7th generation will be the generation of the rainbow, because it'll be the generation where red, yellow, black, and white is all mixed together in one generation. And it'll be a time when people ride in bugs that cross the land on little highways or on little roads. And I thought the beetle immediately.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing about how, immediately it registered to me that I was the rainbow generation. And immediately it registered to me that we were all to walk the red road the best that we could, that we should all be walking the red. And to me, the red road was about community and about interaction with nature. And so like, that's my like very earliest memory is the 7th fire prophecy. And that's real though. Within all of that is the thought process. And I remember my mom talking about this when she was older. And there was this concept as well. There's a concept of apple within many indigenous nations, and this is red on the outside and white on the inside. There's also this concept that you can be white and still be indigenous. There was for a while in like the 70s that a lot of indigenous ancestors were even being reborn into white people, right? Which kind of appropriates a couple of different things. So I'm not really sure how I feel about that today, but there was this concept for a while that the souls of people were being born into people who were genetically white. For me, I think it's really all about a part of that fact that we're just all interconnected energy. And if we can work together, we can create a better space for all of us. And part of that better space is listening to the elders, right? Listening to what was and how to get back there. So yeah, I totally think that that's absolutely a powerful way to do it, is to, you know, they don't have to be your ancestors to hear them. They should definitely be your ancestors to ask of them. But if they're coming to you and talking to you, they don't have to be your ancestors, right?
Okay. I don't ask. I ask for knowledge. I ask to be taught what I need to know. I ask if they have anything to say to me. What's like, I can't even imagine. See, the thing is too, is I don't like that idea of manifestation or asking for things, because I want to give that up to, are you frozen?
I might be.
Oh, no, you were just so still.
I have I'm stimming out on a piece of thread. And
okay.
No, you're
okay.
I'm here.
Like, my life has changed so drastically, and I live in a completely different world now than I did 2 years ago. Like, even though nothing physically has changed, my world is different. And I wouldn't have chosen that for myself. And so I would prefer to be led, to be spirit led and follow guidance, as opposed to saying for myself, this is what I want because I think this is going to make me happy. Whereas if I say, okay, what's next? Then I feel more guided to a life that will be suited to me than my own small ability to understand what's next.
And this was an amazing conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for allowing me this space to speak and for having this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Absolutely. Okay. This is amazing. Thank you so much. Have a great day. And may it be just light and full and joyful.
Love it. Thank you. You as well.
Okay.
Bye. Bye.